Good afternoon and welcome to Panel 1, Session 2. My name is Johannes Kepler and I'm your panel leader for this particular session, which is called Connecting with Industry to be able to support them more effectively. Now, before I jump into this particular session, I'd like to give those who are newcomers, who weren't here already this morning, a quick overview of what Panel 1 is about. Panel 1 is concerns policies and programs to drive transformation. And what we mean by that is we have a challenge. 2050, we're supposed to be fully decarbonized. And to achieve that, we really need a drastic step change in the types of policies and programs that we design and develop. And this step change requires us really to connect, we'll say, the economics of business with the reality of climate change. A big ask because we're quite behind in this kind of connecting point. Now, this panel 1 in particular has posed 2 questions of which the panelists are all working hard to answer. These questions really concern how we're going to deliver a more effective, a more efficient, multi-stakeholder approach to this, let's say, transformative design of new policies and programs. And number 2, taking into account that energy efficiency is perhaps the core of decarbonization, there are kind of a wide range of other elements that we need to take into account to really achieve true decarbonization. And these can range from financing, energy technologies, renewable energy, and all of these need to be taken into consideration in parallel to energy efficiency. And the question really is, how can we do that? How can we interconnect all of these other elements with energy efficiency to achieve decarbonization? So that's panel 1. And like I said, this particular session builds a little bit on the session we had earlier this morning, which was titled Understanding What Really Needs to Be Done and Sharing the Necessary Knowledge. This panel, number 2, is, as I said, connecting with industry to be able to support them more effectively. And to do that, we have 4 extraordinary panelists to present some very, very good ideas and approaches and insights. These panelists are Clemens Rohde from the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research. We have Erwin Cornelis from ENGIE Impact. We have Christiane Egger from the Energiesparverband in Austria. We have Matthias Linhart from the Energy Institute at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz. And I have seen their presentations already, and I can assure you, you're in for a treat. There's no doubt about that. But before we jump into those presentations, I would like to just let you, the audience, know how you can engage, because we're going to have all 4 presentations at once, one after the other, followed by discussion. And that discussion will be fueled by your questions. And I would ask that as we go through the presentations, if you have a question, please put it into the Q&A section, not the chat section, but the Q&A section. And keep an eye out. If your question is already there, don't duplicate it. You can vote for it. You can add votes to a particular question that will move it up the list, and I'll make sure to ask. If you want to reply to one of the questions, please feel free, but don't ask a question and reply because I won't be able to pick up on it. So please put all your questions into the Q&A. And with that, I think we can jump straight away into our first presentation to get the ball rolling. For that, we have Clemens Rohde, who is going to speak about energy efficiency networks, the rollout of a successful concept over the world. So, Clemens, I hand over with pleasure to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I need to start my video so you see my camera. Perfect. Thank you, Hannes, for the opportunity to speak here today about the concept of energy efficiency networks. And this presentation was actually a bit of a challenge because 2 papers we proposed for the conference were merged into one. And so you're going to get, on the one hand, an overview of what's happening in the world, and on the other hand, some latest development from the monitoring process in Germany. This paper has been, is the result of joint efforts of several people, and you see them here on the first slide. So Apart from me from Fraunhofer ISI, Antoine Durand, my colleague, and my colleague Lisa Neusel have been heavily involved in all the work presented here. And from Adelphi, it's Anton Barkhausen and Mia Jenstelle, who have been contributing especially to the national results from the monitoring process of the energy efficiency networks in Germany. So let's see what we're gonna see today. And before I go into the details, I have one slide telling you a little bit about what is an energy efficiency network at all. Because sometimes there's a bit of confusion about the term network, and it sounds for some people who hear it for the first time a bit like, okay, it's a bunch of people just sitting together drinking coffee and talking about energy efficiency. But it's very much more like that. So it's, if we have people from the US here, it's more like the cohort approach, you know, in the context of energy management. The major focus of an energy efficiency network is, on the one hand, the sharing experiences on energy savings, but, and this is the even more important part, it's to implement solutions. So the term implementation network in the end might have been better than an energy efficiency network, to make it clear that it's not about information exchange only, but that the implementation of measures is standing at the core of an energy efficiency network. It's usually a process which lasts for several years. So you find a group of people who are willing to cooperate together. You start with an energy audit in every other company. You set yourself a target. You regularly visit yourselves, exchange on topics. And if you want to read more about background, we have publications on that and how that works in detail. So you visit your partner companies, you have network visits and so on. And this is all accompanied by a monitoring process. And you see, this is very close to what is an energy management system. So you have a continuous cycle of identification of measures, then implementation of measures, monitoring, verification, and again, target setting. So you cannot see it as a linear process only, but also as a circular process in terms of management. I want to start with the international experiences shortly, and there's much more to read in the paper, which you can download on ECEE's website. And there was supposed to be an animation here, but it still doesn't work. Unfortunately, you would see that the concept is spreading out from Switzerland, starting in the late 80s of the last century, all over the world. So right now we have quite an impressive figures of energy efficiency networks in different countries all over the world. You see here countries like China, Germany, Switzerland, and United States and Sweden are the 5 countries with the most networks according to their pure count. But in other countries, the concept is starting to somehow be piloted, and let's see how the experience will turn out. All in those countries where the network concept has been established only recently. In total, far more than 1,000 networks have been established, implemented worldwide. But as said before, 3 countries account for 85% of the networks worldwide. They have different strategies how to implement them. In Switzerland, it's part of the target agreement of individual companies with the state government, because they can get relief from the carbon tax. So it's one of those semi-voluntary schemes where companies participate voluntarily in a scheme, but get quite some reward from that from the government, in that case a carbon tax relief. In Germany, it's actually a scheme which is also a voluntary agreement. There's no real direct counter value for that from the government. So it's a voluntary agreement signed by the government and 22 industry associations. And the target was to implement 500 energy efficiency networks until 2020. This target will not be reached very likely. We will be close to 300 by the end of this year, hopefully. And in China, it was the State Grid Corporation who initiated the energy efficiency networks in 3 economic regions. Sweden has started quite an impressive pilot project, also with a regional approach. And in the US, we have the cohort approach, and some of the cohorts have all the features which we deem necessary to be called an energy efficiency network, called an energy efficiency network. As time is short in this presentation, that's all regarding the international experiences, but we will for sure be able to speak about that later in the Q&A session. So now I will present you some recent results from Germany. In Germany, history of networks is also almost 20 years, lasting for almost 20 years. And after a rather large pilot scheme with 30 energy efficiency networks, we then had this Energy Efficiency Network Initiative with the voluntary agreement with the 500 networks target. And several criteria were defined for an energy efficiency network to be recognized in this initiative. And among others, so a minimum number of participants and so on and so on. One of the prerequisites to be recognized was that the network takes part in the monitoring process, which is hosted by the federal government and carried out by two contractors, so Adelphi and Fraunhofer ISI together. A bit of a challenge here, and I will come back to that at the end of my presentation, is that it's a voluntary scheme. So there's no counter value for the company. So it's not so easy to motivate companies to take part in another monitoring process for which they don't have a direct counter value. And I will tell that in the challenges at the end of my presentation. I've got a lot of slides right now with very many figures, but only 7-8 minutes left. So I will not say anything about every detail on that slide, but I will show you some of the main characteristics which I think are important if we look at the monitoring. And the report, all the results you see here now are from the latest monitoring report, which dates back to the last year. And we had until then monitored nearly 90 energy efficiency networks. Each network, as you've seen before, 5 to 10 companies, so several hundreds of companies have contributed to those results. What's interesting to see is that the company sizes and also then the energy savings reported by the companies and the networks differ very much. We have networks with comprise of very small companies, and we have networks which comprise of very large or very energy intensive companies. And you see that when you look at the fractal values here in the first row of the table, which shows the final energy savings with a mean value of 31,000 megawatt hours per year, but a median value of only 4,600. So the distribution is not a normal distribution, but it's heavily left skewed. The smaller companies, they dominate somehow. The fractal values and the mean value and the total savings are dominated by fewer but larger networks. And the same is of course true for the deviated from savings, the primary energy savings and the greenhouse gas savings, which you can see in the rows below. So there's a huge deviation of savings. You see the standard deviation, which is big. You see the 10 and 90% fractal values, which differ very much by orders of magnitude. So you see the networks have very different characteristics here, which is of course important when you look at the monitoring. You have few networks which dominate the overall result. You see that here, it's a graphical distribution of the same data. So you see final energy savings, primary energy savings, and CO2 savings with the distribution savings per network here. So you see the same effect that you have a very heavily left skewed distribution of results. But what is interesting is not only which savings the companies deliver, but how this is predictable in some way, and how this how this relates to the targets the companies have set themselves. As I said before, it's an energy management system in a wider sense. So companies have set themselves a target, and the interesting question is, how do they achieve their target? We analyzed that too, and you can see the results in this slide here. We have the network targets, which also vary very much between the different networks. So you see networks with only 500 megawatt hours per year, and networks which have set themselves a target of 100,000 megawatt hours per year. And the target achievement is also varying between the different networks. In average, the networks overachieved their targets, but we also have quite some companies, and you see that in the distribution in the second row, that didn't achieve their target, 25% of the companies did only achieve half of their target they set themselves at the beginning of the network operation. But on the other hand, 25% overachieved their target by at least 2/3 compared to the target they set themselves. So the interesting thing is when you want to see, okay, do they achieve their target? Yeah, they usually overachieve in average, but it's very different among the different companies. So you can't say, okay, all the networks reached their target. This might be an indication that the targets have not been set too low for the companies, and you can see that there's also no relation between the size of the target and the achievement. So it's not like the lower targets are more likely to be achieved. But this is not on the slide here, but this is deeper analysis. And again, here in the graphical representation, the relative target achievements of the different networks, but I'll skip that. Which measures are implemented within the energy efficiency networks? And there it's interesting to look on the one hand at the share of savings and then on the share of measures, which you can see. And when you look at the pure share of measures, and I admit the color coding is not optimal in that slide because you can't really see, but the order of the different technologies shown on the right, they follow the same order as in the graph. And if you count correctly, you see that lighting measures in terms of quantity make for almost 1/3 of all the implemented measures by pure count. But in terms of savings, lighting measures only contribute to 6% of the overall reported savings. And on the other hand, process heat, processes, waste heat, CHP, those kinds of measures, they contribute to the major share of savings in which are reported in the energy efficiency networks. And it's a bit interesting that on the one hand, you have those classical low-hanging fruits in terms of easy to implement measures where you can easily achieve a high number like lighting and so on. And they are there, but they are not the major driver for the savings shown by the networks, and especially compressed air, which is the classical low-hanging fruit of energy efficiency measures, contributes only 2% to the overall reported savings. On the other hand, the major savings come from processes, process heat, heat-related measures. What did we find? And this is a text-heavy slide, I have to admit, but the success factors for energy efficiency networks we found out is that networks which show commitment and conviction with the topic of energy efficiency on both sides, on the one hand, the participating companies, but also on the moderators' side, they have a very strong positive effects in various aspects of the networks which have been also observed in an evaluation, and also with regard to monitoring. So if you have companies who are into the topic of energy efficiency, they are much more likely to provide good data to a monitoring process. So their data is more complete, more accurate, and so on. So this made our work much easier if we have committed companies in the context of energy efficiency. So also, when the companies really dedicate time to providing data and material resources, also good templates already within the network operation period, this helped. Also, companies which actively engage with the topic, companies which understand the concept of energy efficiency networks and network operators who understand the context, those companies were much more likely to contribute. And companies which just participated for some compliance reasons or so on, you saw that they were not so much into it. What was also important was making clear the objectives on the one hand and the details, the operational details of the monitoring early enough to the companies, because it's a process which is outside the normal network operation. And if you tell the companies early enough, it's easy for them to collect the necessary data then to build the overall picture of energy savings. What was challenging in the monitoring process, the typical operational problems, so lack of resources, lack of time, long absence of staff, and so on. So the usual barriers you see for all energy efficiency topics also applied to participation in the monitoring. This we have been told that very often. And sometimes we were told, okay, this is a voluntary scheme. Why should we even report them to the federal government? Again, our savings, for us, it's important that we know what we did in our network. Why should we do that? And that makes it a bit hard in a purely voluntary scheme, of course, to convince. So what's in for the company to report savings to the federal government if there's nothing in for them as a counter value? So that, having said that, I have to thank you for your attention. My time is up. Hannes reminded me just in the chat, I'm talking too lengthy again, and I hope we can discuss the topic a bit later in the Q&A session. Thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Clemens. And to be fair, you did perfectly well on time. It worked out really good right to your last slide. So many thanks for that. I must admit, I do think that the networks are, you know, even if they are about meeting for coffee, I think you can get great things done over coffee. So it's worth keeping that in mind as well. But let me move quickly on to the next presentation. This is from Erwin Cornelis. He is going to be speaking about shaping a sustainable industry, conclusions from roundtable meetings. Erwin, I leave it over to you, please.
Okay, just checking audio. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Fine. So my name is Erwin Cornelis, and I have this presentation together with Carlos Goldstein from the European Commission. And you might remember that those who have participated to the previous edition of this industrial efficiency conference, that at the end, at the final plenary session, there was the announcement of a project in which the European Commission wants to engage with the industry to know more about, to have a better understanding about the dynamics behind energy efficiency investments. Well, that project was awarded to us, and that project finished earlier this year, and here are the results. And moving to the next slide, yes, there it is. So I have a brief introduction about the study, why and how. There was a focus on the food and beverage sector. I wrote why that was the case. Then the takeaways about from the 4 roundtable meetings that we had with representatives from the industry and all the stakeholders, guidance and best practices, what you can do, and then some lessons learned from that whole process. Well, don't break open an open door. Why this project? Well, we all know that we need to decarbonize. The industry has done already a great deal in the last 3 decades, but we need to step up and move to a decarbonized industry as well, as all sectors. And well, this is why this project is about. So, how was this project structured? Oh, and there was, I would like to see, here it is, okay, thank you. So in the bulk, there were 4 roundtable meetings with representatives from the European Commission and the industry and other stakeholders to discuss the dynamics of investments in energy efficiency and also renewable energy, from which, well, there was guidance and best practices that need to be developed. The project looked at 5 energy-intensive sectors, but only one could be focused, could be targeted by the project. And as an introductory task, we need to make suggestions of which of those 5 sectors which are listed over there that we needed to select to start those series of roundtables with, and the food and beverage sector has been selected from that. And next slide will elaborate that. At the end was the concept, an assessment of the concept of organizing roundtables and this way of engaging with the stakeholders. So the food and beverage sector was selected. Why was that? Well, actually, it's relevant in all EU member states. Not every sector is relevant in all EU member states. It's also a very heterogeneous one, and because it has a lot of subsectors which are very different in composition and activity. It's also very heterogeneous in composition because it also has a lot of SMEs. And at your right, you have some key figures in that sector. In task 2, we organized 4 roundtable meetings. And here you see the schedule of the roundtable meetings. The first one focused on barriers and solutions. The second one, there where we engaged with representatives of national and local authorities, and we discussed policies and programs. The third one, which was back-to-back to the Enercon conference, there we had a lot of representatives of corporate companies, and we discussed decarbonization strategies of such companies. And then the last one was in the framework of European Sustainable Energy Week, with some broad conclusions. And also here you see a nice picture of the two men leading this project, me and Mr. Goldstein. What are the main takeaways from these roundtable meetings? Well, the first one, when we discussed the barriers, well, we came to the conclusion that it's a very complex dynamics, so that there is a multitude of barriers which is hampering investments, and that in function of the stage of the decision-making process, other barriers, different barriers play a role. Also, companies with different characteristics face different barriers, small ones versus two big ones. And this actually puts a challenge for the policymaker, because, well, there was actually no single policy instrument that can work as a panacea to remove all barriers. And the second, oh, that was a bit too fast. Now I hoped to see, no, yeah, I have, I would like to see, Rachel, could you please show the next, yeah, there it is, thank you. And the second roundtable, I have discussed policies and programs, and in the triangle you see what kind of programs we have been discussing. And what we could identify as key catalysts is that the supply of technical support to companies that really stimulates the uptake of energy efficiency equipment by the companies. And also referring to the previous presentation, there we discussed learning networks and how important that is to provide that technical support to the companies. Also, trustworthy and independent energy professionals need to be there also to create confidence. And what we also had an example of a local program. So the initiative can come from different jurisdiction levels. It can come from European level, from national level, but also from the local level. That was also a nice eye opener. So the third round table, there we had representatives of corporate companies, and there we discussed the motivation of those companies. Why do they develop a decarbonization strategy? And we concluded that, well, the commitment to climate was really the basis of these strategies, so the corporate social responsibility. What we also saw is that the food and beverage sector, they do not look only at the operations they control, they operate, but also at a broader supply chain. They also look at the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and from the crops these are cultivated as feed-in for that industry. Also, the food and beverage sector is, well, they are dependent on raw materials, and the crop yields of those raw materials is impacted by climate change. So that's why I also could see that the food and beverage sector is really sensitive to the climate change and the impact it can have on the crop yield. So that's why they're also motivated to act on that. What we also find out is that energy efficiency and renewable energy, so these were the two core elements, these were the two core themes topics that we discussed, but they are not looked at in a silo by the companies. They are actually pillars of a more comprehensive decarbonization strategy. Also, within the decision-making processes, non-energy considerations sometimes outweigh the energy benefits. In the fourth roundtable, there it was a discussion with a larger group of stakeholders, and there we focused on the thermal energy, the renewable thermal energy, how it lacks maturity, also the valorization of waste heat and the need for sector integration. And we ended by concluding that ensuring trust, commitment and buy-in of the implementing actors, that these are the three golden stages of delivery. Next, oh, that was one too fast. Previous one, please. I'll leave the control to you, Rachel. Yeah. At task 3, there we looked at the best practices and policy recommendations. But first, we had a look at what kind of policy instruments were implemented by the EU member state, and we categorized them in prescriptive, economic, and supportive, the carrot, the stick, and the sermon, if you would like. Next, please. So these are the statistics. So when organizing the measures as implemented by the EU member states in those 3 categories, and also looking at what kind of barrier they address, we found out that the economic barriers are addressed the most, that about half of the enlisted policies do tackle economic instruments and basically by economic measures. Second comes behavior and organizational barriers that are addressed mainly by prescriptive measures. Also informational barriers that are addressed mainly by supportive measures, and awareness and competence related barriers are the least addressed and mainly, well, exclusively by supportive measures. Next slide, please. We also looked into exemplary policies and measures, and at the left you see what kind of measures they are, and there were more details in this in the paper. And what we could learn as key lesson is, well, that just confirming the key lessons of the previous slides, that energy saving investments are not considered from an energetic point of view only, but in a wider context. Also here, the need to have technical support is also emphasized, and again also the commitment of the top management, that is also emphasized here. Next slide, please. Well, overall, yeah, there was no single policy that works as a panacea. That slide might demand more explanation. Here we looked at what the EU can do, and we organized it in working with companies, working with products, working with EU member states, and then economic stimuli. We're working on companies. Well, first of all, there is an IPPC directive that says that every time a company, an industrial facility needs a new permit, then an energy audit needs to be carried out. And there we asked the European Commission to evaluate that, whether that really is done in an effective way by the EU member states. Second, we also saw that the corporate climate responsibility is really a motivator to commit to climate action, and well, we invite the European Commission to work at the standardization of those strategies, like as in the United States with the RE100 and other initiatives. Also from the United States, there is a network of universities and high schools working together and supporting the industry. There's a lot of industries supporting the industry also here in Europe, but they are not that well connected, and well, creating a network of those working on that topic and having a better collaboration between those different universities is also something that we advise to the European Commission. We're looking to products, then we look to eco-design and energy labeling framework. Quite a lot is covered already, and there was not that much that we could, not that many that we could add. Actually, the only thing that we could add was molding machines, so that we also advised the European Commission to also look at molding machines. The supply chain is a very important vector also to work on the decarbonization of the industry, and there we invited the European Commission to work on the regulation of embedded carbon of products, so that via that route the industry can also decarbonize. We're working on the EU member states. A lot of policies and measures are implemented, but are they effective and are they working well? Well, a pan-European study to assess this could be good, to highlight, to identify the goods, the best practices, and to instruct the EU member states based on those best practices. 1 minute left, I know that. And for waste heat, well, there is a need to create a market for waste heat, and a function of that, carbon credits to the supplied waste heat might stimulate that market. Next slide, please. So we had this project with 4 roundtables with the industry. One big lesson about that concept of having roundtable meetings with the industry. So it started with a sectoral approach, but along the way, we found out that the conclusions were not specific for the food and beverage sector only, but also relevant for the other sectors. And that's why we advised to have more a regional approach rather than a sectoral one. And also having attractive leaflets as a nice way to present the results. Final slide, please. And some questions to open up the debate. How can we stimulate companies to think about energy efficiency first when developing decarbonization strategies? And how can we improve the knowledge base and energy efficiency amongst practitioners and also amongst policy officers from all jurisdiction levels? And that's all, folks. Thank you very much for your kind support.
Thank you very much, Erwin. That was very much appreciated. And I especially like your last 2 questions. These were questions we actually started to address in the previous session. And I would simply ask the audience to consider those and to either ask additional questions or provide their input on those. Let me move very quickly on to Matthias Linhart, who is going to present on Ennshafen case study, Insights into Real-Life Industrial Energy Cooperation Development. Matthias, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Hannes. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining in for my presentation of the Ennshafen case study. My name is Matthias Linhart. I work at the Energy Institute at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz. Before I start with the case study, I want to quickly run over the project that has actually enabled us to conduct the research within the Ennshafen industrial park. Let's see if I can operate the screen. There we go. The S-Park project is still ongoing and deals with envisioning and testing new models of sustainable energy cooperation and services in industrial parks. And it receives funding from the European Union. The S-Park project involves 7 lighthouse parks, aka demo sites in 6 different countries, several universities and research institutes, as well as a communication expert and 22 followers. Out of the S-Parks project, I want to present today the Ennshafen case study that provides insights into real-life industrial energy cooperation development. Before I start with the specific case study, I want to quickly give you some background information on industrial energy cooperation. Industrial energy cooperation, which is part of industrial symbiosis, was kickstarted in the 1970s and 80s with an industrial park in Denmark, and has since found a couple of adapters in about 70 examples in Europe and many more worldwide. The industrial symbiosis combines industrial actors and other institutions and involves transactions of materials, of energy and water, as well as intangible resources such as know-how between different companies. It can be either bi or multilateral and can even go beyond the limits of the industrial compound itself. The goal of industrial symbiosis is predominantly the improvement of feasibility, but also the reduction of ecological impacts. Energy cooperation as part of industrial symbiosis primarily deals with the exchange of energy as well as knowledge. Did I go too far? Yeah. The goal of the project at the Ennshafen is to test theoretical energy cooperation solutions, to identify potential barriers and to define instruments to overcome these barriers, and also draw generalizable conclusions for other parks. Ultimately, we, with this project, also want to gain knowledge on how to trigger and maintain industrial energy cooperation networks. As we've seen in various other projects, that a noticeable amount of energy is still wasted by businesses and in industrial parks that could potentially be used elsewhere. The Ennshafen Industrial Park is located in Lower Austria and Upper Austria. You can see it on the screen here. It's home to about 60 different companies with about 2,300 employees, and is connected via rail, road, and also via waterway, as it's located at the inlet of the river Traun into the Danube. It features a very diverse range of businesses, ranging from a wood processing plant that you can see here, to producers of animal feed, automotive parts, several transport, storage, and shipping companies, as well as Austria's largest container terminal. Here you can see another shot of the scheme of the industrial park with the Danube over to the northeast. How did we go about starting this energy cooperation project? In the first step, we conducted literature research in order to define the best approach for external facilitators, aka the Energy Institute in this case, to engage with companies, to familiarize them with the concept of energy cooperation and industrial symbiosis, and to learn more about the key issues that need to be kept in mind and or overcome when you do such a project. Lastly, the best tools to accelerate the development of energy cooperation were defined, whereas the starting off tool derived from the literature research and was the conducting of face-to-face interviews with a selection of companies based on a standardized questionnaire. The selection of companies took place based on the assumed amounts of energy consumption of each company, as well as their expected influence in the park, in collaboration with the park management. The interviewees were usually general energy operational managers, where the average duration of the interviews was about an hour and a half. The method of face-to-face interviews was chosen over actual sent-out questionnaires, because we were afraid that the response rate of sent-out questionnaires would be limited. In addition to conducted interviews, using the questionnaires, we also defined workshops from the literature research as being very helpful tools to establish energy cooperations within the industrial park. So we had a kickoff workshop during which the companies that had been interviews, plus the park management and the Energy Institute, portrayed the identified possibilities for energy cooperation, and also presented an energy cooperation roadmap that summarized the potential projects. The intention of this first kickoff workshop, which actually worked out pretty well, was the transfer of knowledge, discussion and interaction between the companies to give them a chance to network with other companies on the issue of energy, as well as to motivate them to put more focus on energy and contemplate energy efficiency measures at their site. In addition, it was agreed on to hold 2 workshops a year for all companies at the industrial park, where interesting energy-related issues should be presented, such as, for example, electric charging mobility, infrastructure, PV power plants, and those topics should then be presented by experts, solutions should be discussed, and again, knowledge exchanged. In addition, the workshops should also be used to discuss bilateral and or multilateral projects. To give you an idea of what the questionnaire looked like, it first started out with asking generic questions on the business as well as employee and production data. It went on to investigate potential energy audits and energy efficiency measures that had already or were in the process of being implemented also in the future. And it also asked specific questions on the energy and material flows, as well as load profiles and waste streams. Lastly, the position, state of knowledge, and the interest of the company with respect to potential energy cooperations was asked. What's important to mention in this context is that it's important that the interview has some background in technical issues in order not to miss out on potential energy cooperation possibilities that are a lot of times hidden between the lines and might not be obvious even to the interviewee himself or herself. Did I go too fast? No one, but yeah. The results show that barriers for establishing energy cooperation can be found in various scientific areas, be it technical, be it economic, social, or legal. 50% of these barriers already apply to intra-company energy measures, so without going beyond the borders of the company. And another 50% only occur in the case of cooperation. Some barriers are tightly connected to specific countries, regions, and markets, such as legal and economic barriers. If you look at, for example, the price of energy, which is a key factor for actually implementing energy cooperation projects. Even though technical, economic, legal, and framework barriers are often seen as the most relevant, it's in reality oftentimes social, organizational, and information barriers that are most crucial for implementing energy cooperation. As for the Ennshafen specific results, we found that the industrial park already shares some infrastructure such as railway, port facilities, and sewers, as well as an overall marketing strategy for the industrial park. The existing businesses hardly have any business relation as of yet, and the composition of the park is very heterogeneous, meaning they have very diverse branches of business where they operate in. Therefore, also very negligible competing interests. As we could see, the companies have a wide range of processes, energy demands, and temperature levels, and a lot of waste heat potential can be found. We found also a lot of potentials with respect to energy efficiency that still remain. We also found that the amount of energy consumed gives little or no information on the type of manufacturing process, the efficiency of the process, and the company as a whole. Additional impediments on site for the implementation of energy cooperation are the differences in ownership, in land and infrastructure, as well as the physical distances of the companies. Sometimes the companies don't even know what the neighboring company actually does or what processes actually take place at the site. I have to get going as the time is running out, so I'll just move on to the next slide. So far, after 2 years of work showing signs that it's very difficult to implement energy cooperation, the one implemented project is the Park Internal Energy Working Group that meets twice a year. Several projects are under development, such as the intercompany bilateral waste heat utilization, a joint strategy on e-mobility charging infrastructure, a joint strategy on optimizing heavy transport with LNG and CNG infrastructure, and what's quite relevant for a port company is the shoreside electricity for anchoring ships that has to be provided in the future. In the future, we hope to also deal with the joint purchase of energy and also with the joint purchase of PV power plants. As we've found, there's more, the companies need more information. It's important that communication is kept up and that networking on energy topics and the spreading of information is kept up. And it's also very crucial to ensure trust between companies from the very start with respect to data handling, and that an external facilitator, in this case, the Energy Institute, is very important to get the whole process going. To sum it all up, the companies are generally open for cooperation. It needs to be actively promoted and implemented to keep the energy cooperation platform operating. The impacts of the energy cooperation should always be documented and analyzed, also to serve as motivating examples for others. Inclusive and interactive methods such as face-to-face interviews and workshops have proven to be very promising and useful. And our role as facilitator can decrease as the project evolves from being very active in the very beginning with interviews and workshops to being less active as the energy cooperation platform stands on its own feet. In any case, more research is necessary, and in the light of climate pledges agreed on in the Paris conference, it makes sense to enforce the use of energy from waste energy. Sorry, I have to keep going. If you have any questions, please contact me via the HUBA website or at the Energy Institute. And if you want to follow the S-Parks project, feel free to visit the website. Thank you for listening in.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And I am going to turn quickly to the audience and say, please we have one more presentation to go. So please feel free to start posting some questions on the Q&A. It's your chance to get involved. I have plenty of questions myself, but I would prefer to take them from the audience. So it's a good opportunity for you to get your say in. So for the last presentation, we have Christiane Egger, who is going to talk about leaders in the industrial energy transition. And Christiane, I believe you're also going to talk about knocking on doors. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Hannes. Hello, good afternoon. It's now my pleasure to talk a little bit about our initiatives here in Austria. When we talk about, oops, this was too fast. Can we go back, please, to the first slide? So no, can we please go back to the first slide? No, that's too far. First slide. Yeah, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. When we talk about industry decarbonization, we talk about competitiveness. So we leave in the first step we focus on the energy transition and how it contributes to competitiveness. For this, we have created something that we call Industry 5.0. And with my next slide, I want to show you what I mean by that. So in all the step of industrial revolution, there was one economic advantage, one technological advantage that created the competitive advantage. And in Industry 4.0, this was IoT and cyber physical systems. Now we believe that the next big thing will be Industry 5.0, so in energy decarbonization, or in general decarbonization, as the decisive factor for competitiveness. We all know there's the Green Deal and the targets of 2050 in Austria. We've set ourselves the even more ambitious target to become climate neutral by 2040. And climate neutrality is a game changer. So in the past, when we talk about measures in industry and business, or in general, this was a step-by-step process. So one energy efficiency investment after the other. But when we talk about climate neutrality, we have to work back from this goal. So in that sense, it's a game changer. And we have to work back, in our case, from the 2040 goal. Our region, Austria, with the capital Linz, is the industrial heart of Austria. More than 25% of the industrial exports are manufactured here. And our vision is to have competitiveness and quality of life through decarbonization, not despite of, as it often was in the past. For this, we need to tackle energy in buildings, in manufacturing, and in transport. We want to maintain or increase market leadership in energy products and services. And for that, we need innovation, investment, and involvement from the public sector, from the citizens, from business, and from industry. So this is our vision towards this climate neutrality. Our own organization, the Energy Agency, is one of these enablers. So we are there to promote and to work towards the energy transition and towards climate neutrality. Part of our work, as we discussed in the previous session, is knocking on doors. So trying to push and interest all energy consumers and everyone along the value chain in being more interested in the energy transition, in energy efficiency, in renewables, and in energy innovation. We do 10,000 face-to-face energy advice sessions, to give you one example. The energy transition is already a major business factor. On the one hand, you can see this in our network of energy and environmental companies, the Clean Energy Cluster Up Austria, where we are in charge of the energy aspect, where we have over 250 partner companies. On the other hand, you can see this in the investment that is done at the moment. So in our small region, 1.5 million people, over 2 billion euro are invested every year in the energy transition. And you can see a third of this is industrial energy efficiency and CHP. So this makes us already an economic sector that of its own value. Why is the energy transition important to us? As you can see here on my slide, 44% of our total energy consumption is for manufacturing. So on the one hand, energy intensive companies, iron, steel, chemical, and a lot of other more or less energy intensive businesses of different sectors. So clearly this is critical. It is obviously also critical for competitiveness, employment. Over 40% of our regional GDP come from industry. We have managed in the last 15 years to keep GHG emission from industry stable. That may not sound much, but we had an economic growth of about a third. So this was quite a good improvement in energy intensity. Nevertheless, knowing we have carbon neutrality as a goal, clearly keeping things stable is not enough. So how do we proceed here? We have carrot sticks, quite well known. So financial incentive, regulatory measures, the tambourines, so the previous speakers called it the sermons. We call it the tambourines, so the information, the awareness raising, the training, and of course, keeping in mind how urgent this all is, we need the skateboard. So this is innovation to make this whole transformation go a lot faster than it did in the past. Now, what are we doing to it? This is a glimpse of some of our programs. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see subsidies. So part of this whole policy package, as Hugo Salamanca called it this morning, is the financial measures to fast-track investment. I'm very pleased to report that one of the very first COVID investment programs, the investments for companies, which opened last week, there was a huge uptake from businesses of all kinds, including industry, for investments in energy efficiency and renewables. There's at the moment, there's €1 billion in that pot, but we hope for a top up from the government to get these investment dynamics going again that we had before the COVID. On the regulatory side, we, example, have banned oil heating in new buildings. We are currently, there is a process going on discussing how the step change will work for existing systems, there's already some outlines how that's going to happen. On the innovation side, there is a platform, New Energy for Industry, an R&D platform for 8 years that focused on industrial decarbonization. If I have time, I will have another slide on that. And on the left-hand side, you have this tambourine measures. So one is industrial microgrids, an innovation program for energy exchange among industrial companies. The Ennshafen project that was just mentioned is also part of this. We have developed a new simple tool that helps companies assess their current status in decarbonization. And if we suddenly start looking at CO2, in addition to energy, many companies are surprised by what they see. They have a good feeling for their energy numbers, but still GHG numbers are still something very different. And there is a initiative I'm leading for the so-called Industrial Leaders Initiatives, where we work with 16 pioneer companies. And what do we do in these initiatives? We want to understand how to make climate neutrality happen in practice of an industrial company. There's one thing of having the lofty political goal, but what can a company that says, yes, I want to do this? How can they do it strategically and practically? So make it part of their normal business practice. So to borrow from another initiatives, from boardroom to boiler room, this is what we try to do with these 16 companies and develop tools and methods for replication. These companies are absolute pioneers in their field. Together, they employ more than 25,000 staff, and they have a turnover of 7 billion. So they bring quite a critical mass to the floor. Just to give you a glimpse of what we are discussing there, on the left-hand side, you see what I call the new normal. So investments that most of these companies have done to a large extent. I will not go into detail. Now we're talking about the next big steps together. So part of their decarbonization strategy will include measures from that. So clearly a focus is renewables for industrial processes, not for space heating. We can tick that box in terms of technological solutions, but for very high and very low temperatures. Having energy and CO2 as a KPI in the companies. We know of some true pioneer companies that have done that. We try to implement that. And one other important thing is harnessing the added value of the energy transition. So all these multiple benefits, but broken down on a company level so that it can actually be used in investment decision. One word on our R&D platform, New Energy for Industry. It's an Austrian-wide innovation network and a national hub for industrial energy systems. Their focus is, as the name says, decarbonization of industry. And our ambition is to develop solutions made in Austria to help Austria remain an industry location. And of course, also to help us export more solutions. Currently, we have 10 ongoing sub-projects, and the approval of more projects is in the pipeline. One of these projects is a project called Industrial Microgrids, where the focus is on business models. So how can these energy exchange between companies be organized in practice? Which kind of services do they need? And how can we all make that happen in practice? And I would like to end with an invitation to a conference, the Industrial Energy Efficiency Conference, which we'll be organizing in the context of the World Sustainable Energy Day in the coming February. As it looks now, this is hopefully going to be a hybrid event. So hopefully some people will also be here in person, and partly it will be an online event. There's a call for paper out there. There's also a Young Energy Researchers Conference that we hold. So I'd be happy to see papers coming from the industrial scene from today's conference, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christiane, and also thank you for finishing with that slide. I have to say it's also a great conference for everybody to keep in mind. So definitely a good idea to show that, to remind everybody of further great things to happen in this topical area. So let me now move to the stage of questions. The audience have put up a few questions, and I would say to the audience, keep putting them up. Hopefully you've kind of got plenty of good ideas after this round of presentations. So please do put your questions up on the Q&A. In the meantime, I will start posing the questions we have to the panelists to get the ball rolling. And one of the first questions that was put up, and I think it's actually quite a relevant question, was directed at Clemens and the Energy Efficiency Network presentation. Clemens, the question was, what is the reason the low-hanging fruit is not a main share of the savings? Have participating companies already carried out these measures, or are these fruits, these low-hanging fruits, still there to pick? And I think it's an interesting question. Perhaps you can give some insights from your side.
Yes, yeah, thank you for the question. It's indeed a very important question. As I've tried to show in the slide I've put up, in terms of measure count, the companies carry out quite some measures in the context of low-hanging fruit. So they do lighting, they do compressed air, they do motors, they do all that stuff. So but we really need to see where the huge saving potentials are, and there are not in those cross-cutting technologies actually, because the huge saving potential is not in relative but in absolute terms are there where the energy is used, and this is in energy-intensive industries and the processes and so on. And this is, and as we have those companies also in the networks, major share of savings is contributed by those companies, and thus they are predominant in terms of overall savings achieved. This is not to say that we should not focus on the low-hanging fruits and on the cross-cutting technologies, and compressed air is always important, and lighting is always important, and motors are always important. But we need to keep in mind that the major share of industrial energy use is heat, and classically heat from fossil fuels and energy-intensive processes. And this is where we need to save energy on the one hand, and then the next step, of course, where decarbonization has to come in. And Christiane has said something very right. We still have the challenge of how to decarbonize. I mean, we can make it better incrementally, those processes by means of efficiency. But if we look forward to 2040 in Austria and 2050 in Germany, with the complete decarbonization of the industry, we need innovation there, and we need a radical change of processes. And I think we're going to see great solutions for that in other panels also dealing with the topic here at the conference.
Okay, that's a fair answer, I think. Actually, while you're there, Clemens, because it's also related to the title of this particular session, Connecting with Industry, can I then quickly ask you, with the energy efficiency networks and getting the companies involved, how do we actually let the companies know about the networks? How do we kind of say, come join us, this is a good idea? Is it truly just a selection of companies that join, or is it really any kind of company with any given stage, or literally do they have to already be interested in energy efficiency to get them on board? Or do we have newcomers coming all the time?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very important question. So how to engage companies and networks, and it depends a bit on the type of actors who are trying to activate companies to participate in the networks. And we've seen a broad range of different actors who do that on the German market. So it's regional energy agencies, it's chambers of commerce, but it's also commercial operators, it's utilities and so on. Of course, they have their different background and motivation, which companies they want to take in, and they usually, for example, commercial operators go to their customer base. It's not so easy actually to motivate companies to take part in that, because at first glance it looks like sitting together and drinking coffee, and this is what makes it really a challenge to motivate people, to tell them, okay, you need to invest time in here, you need to even invest money, because you might even some model behind that requires paying a moderator for the sessions and so on and so on. It's your internal time. And what's in for me? What makes it more effective than a classical energy management system, which I can do and which I might even have. So what's in for me? And if they're in, I mean, it's just like doing running just for me. So I hate starting to do it, but if I finished, I'm happy. And this is the same with the energy efficiency network. So it's pretty hard to convince people to start with it. If they're in, they're happy with that. So because then they see, okay, yeah, there are other companies which have the same problems. We can learn from their solution. It helps also, the peer pressure in the group helps. But usually in the company, you need, as always with energy efficiency, you need somebody, and in optimal cases, it's somebody from the top level who says, I make energy efficiency a priority. Without that commitment of the company, it's almost impossible to get such a process going, because without the commitment from somebody at the top management level, how will you get the resources in the company to finally implement measures? If you don't have that, it's just the energy managers sitting together and drinking coffee, and that's not the target of an energy efficiency network.
Actually, I'm going to take something from what you said there and move to Christiane, because you've emphasized that, you know, we need the commitment in the company, we need that driving point. Once they're in, they're happy, but how do you get them in? Christiane, you are engaged with all different types of industry. And at the end there, you showed really the leaders, which are more or less big companies. However, I'm presuming that in the general manufacturing industry side of things, there's a lot of SMEs. How do you manage this balance between the large, which probably visually are more keen to do all of these great things, than the SMEs that are just too busy to do them? And in this balancing act, are you actually able maybe to also use large companies to put pressure on the SMEs in their supply chain? So can large companies also act as a portal to the SMEs to get them on board, to convince them that it's a good idea?
Thank you for the question, Hannes. Well, maybe I was too fast. So actually in that initiatives, we have also some smaller companies. So in that initiative, it's really about being a cutting edge leader. So these are our first adopters. We have cultivated over the last 20 years quite a community of companies of all sizes, of all kinds of sectors, that with an interest in energy efficiency and renewables. We have a really, I think, attractive portfolio of financial support. We offer energy advice that is subsidized. We have a training program. So there's a big portfolio of support, and we keep on, you know, reminding them not to forget about us and about the subject. I don't share these opinion that large companies are more interested in small companies. They may have an energy manager, but I find lots of very good SMEs where the owner is interested. And now that's much better because when he or she says, well, good idea, let's do it, then we do it and then the track to actual implementation is fast. So what these leaders have in common, they're practically, with 3 examples, owner-led and managed, also big ones. And in that initiative, we had both the top management and the energy people interested and motivated. So we do a lot of measures also targeted at management and also at the people who are actually practically doing it.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to keep a bit of continuity in this particular question, because then I would like to move to Ennshafen, because if we take that as an industrial side, I'm presuming as well you have the different size types companies. Taking into account what Christiane just said, that, you know, maybe it's the SMEs that have more motivation sometimes than others. What have you encountered, Matthias, from the Ennshafen case study in terms of this difference between large or small companies, their engagement levels, their commitment levels, how easily they will buy into the idea? Have you come across that as well?
I would definitely agree with Christiane that it's not necessarily big companies that tend to invest in energy efficiency measures, as especially with companies depending on shareholders break-even times or break-even periods are sometimes somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 3 years. So it's very difficult to invest in energy efficiency measures that have an amortization time past that period, which small and medium-sized companies don't always follow. So usually they have break-even times that go beyond 5 years or maybe even 5 to 10 years. So it makes it sometimes a lot easier for smaller companies, especially if they're owner-operated, to invest in these energy efficiency measures. What we've also found is that, you know, a lot of times the dependency whether companies invest in energy efficiency is dependent on just one single person in the company. For example, the energy manager, whose personal interest is to decrease the energy consumption of the company, and he can maybe convince the management to invest in these measures. But once that person leaves, the whole project might actually go down the drain. So a lot of times it's dependent on a couple of people that do this task next to everything else they have to do in the company.
It's an interesting point because ultimately we're showing how big our reliance is on individuals. That it's not a case that this is just a standard procedure for a company, but really it's a case of this particular person is interested, is showing the commitment, is pushing it through. And there's a question here from the audience, and it says, how far can the energy efficiency community push the carrot and stick metaphor? And I think I think the question, the way it's phrased is kind of putting into question how efficient. We use it a lot. Now, admittedly, Christiane brought in tambourines and skateboards, which I think makes it more interesting, but ultimately we do use it a lot, the carrot stick metaphor. But if you take into account the challenge we have that the uptake of energy efficiency decarbonization is so dependent on individuals, are we doing it the wrong way with the carrot stick approach? Are we maybe not putting in enough regulation to keep things on track no matter what, that they become an integrated part of business strategy and not reliant on one people? Or in fact, do we need to do more, let's say, carrot and less stick? Or should we just put that metaphor aside completely and bring in a very hard definitive law that just sets out the pace for everybody at once? And I don't put that just to you, Matthias, I actually put that to to the panel as a whole.
If I may go first, just
you may, of course.
Starting off word.
If I then can jump in.
If you take away the energy intensive industries, which, as Clemens said, make up for a large amount of the absolute energy consumption, a lot of businesses, or the energy consumption of businesses makes up for a very small share of their actually turnover. So for an average company, that's not, so if you take away paper production, steel and so on, cement industry, the average cost for energy will only make up for about let's say 1 to 3% of the turnover. So the incentive to, say, increase the energy efficiency by 50% will only save you 1.5% of your annual costs. So the incentive in that case is very limited as opposed to taking measures in other areas when you look at economic results. So from my perspective, or speaking, it adds here I add a bit of my personal perspective. I think energy in Austria is relatively cheap. If you compare prices of electricity, for example, in Germany, which is almost twice that of Austria. So the incentive to invest in energy efficiency in Austria with a stick is relatively limited.
I think it's the juggle. It's the juggle between a big hard stick and a nice carrot.
It definitely, I mean, there are a lot of incentives in Austria with respect to subsidies for investments and such. But yeah, I'll hand over to Christiane.
Yes, actually, but Christiane, I know Erwin has been trying to come in very quickly on a point on this as well. So I'll just let him come in as well. I have him queued up. 1 second. Erwin, please, you have a point to make as well.
Yeah, I have a few points to make actually to build on the discussion that we had. But perhaps if you allow me, I would like to raise 3 points. Experience from learning networks in Belgium, the role of local authorities, and then carrot, sticks, sermons, or tambourines. About the learning networks, so we also started in Flanders, Belgium, with implementing a first learning network to the example of Germany, and it didn't kick off because there is already a strong policy instrument in place, which is the voluntary agreements covering 80% of the industry, also the medium-sized ones. And actually, well, in that policy instrument, there was a very strong monitoring and reporting and verification component. There is no knowledge sharing component, which is a weakness of the policy instrument. Because of the strength of that long voluntary agreement, actually there was no room, there was little added value of the learning network. Nonetheless, they will renew the voluntary agreements in 2022, and I really do recommend the Flemish authorities also to include the learning aspect, the knowledge sharing aspect in the voluntary agreement. About engaging with SMEs, as already Christiane and Matthias highlighted, there was also a lot of enthusiasm at SMEs to look at energy efficiency and renewable energy. And while I would not use the large companies to stimulate SMEs looking into that, I would rely more on local authorities to look into that. And actually also the example that we have seen here from that region around Linz and that Austria, how it motivates and that stimulates the companies within that region to act on that. That's also a nice example. We also have seen a very nice example of the city of Ghent. So also at city level, action can take in there. And the carrot and the sticks and that metaphor, actually it has 3 components. If you look to the book of 1998, in which that concept was introduced, you had carrot, sticks, and sermons. So you have the prescriptive measures, so what companies have to do. You have the carrots, financial stimuli, but also you have supportive measures, and learning networks is the supportive measures. When you speak about sermons or tambourines, that's equal to me. But that third component is also very important. Actually, it's highlighted by the contribution of Clemens, how important that the support given to companies is, and also especially at SMEs, they need more support than they need finances. So we need to speak about carrot, sticks, sermons, tambourines whatsoever. But these are the 3, that's the golden triangle of policy instruments. Thank you for letting me in.
No problem, and thanks for that, Erwin. You were very efficient with getting across on the 3 points. Christiane, would you like to bring in your argument of the skateboard?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think this is a neither nor discussion. I think it's very clear policy packages. I mean, that's an answer we have found in energy policy 20 years ago. And Hugo Salamanca talked about it today. So I think good measures complement each other, and smart and fast. Markets are moving in a fast way, and we have some example, for example, in renewable heating, where we were really able to place regulation, financial incentive. As I'm not a priest, I would prefer to be a musician. So sermons, I prefer the sermon. And of course, when we speak about industry, we need innovation, we need R&D for the hardcore stuff that we don't have answers yet. And I think only if we implement these together and at the same time, we can achieve the speed that we need.
It's a fair point. And you mentioned something about research, which is another question I'm going to come to, but I want to build upon what we've been talking about a little bit more, because we need a set of policy measures, Christiane, you said. Ultimately, to inform these policy measures, we need a very good input from industry, from all the different sectors, from all the different actors, the SMEs, the large companies. And yet, I don't know if all of you will agree, but more and more I personally hear about a big disconnect between industry, between companies and policymakers, that they don't understand each other, that the policymakers don't have a good grasp of business reality, and that businesses don't understand the motivation policies. This varies from country to country. And again, we're talking this at least on a European level, that it can vary between regions and countries, the engagement, etc. But it's something that it's coming across a lot, is that if we want to advance and get the right policy measures, we need a better engagement between the industry people, between the policymakers, but also the supporting organizations, whether they're research or finance, etc. And this idea, for example, that with the project that Erwin was involved in, the roundtables where people got together and discussed, and I won't just ask this of you, Christiane, I'll ask it of everybody. Is there a way going forward we can accelerate let's say, the development of policy measures based on better engagement with industry? And I'm talking about acceleration. We're moving ahead, but we need to accelerate this. We need much better engagement with the policies to roll out things quicker, pilot projects, feedback, understanding connection with the economics. We have to take economics into account as well. So how can we go forward on this, building upon the networks, the roundtables, the test cases, the case studies, the individual industry initiatives? What's the best way forward, at least on a European scale, not just on a country scale?
So on a local scale, to come back, clearly, Erwin mentioned it, clearly when you work in the region, the impact is much more direct. So to talk to a minister is not very difficult on the regional level. So, and on the regional level, you can see very fast success and mistake, because the interaction is faster. And I think what we need is enablers. So in our case, like an energy agency, on the European level, we have plenty of organizations that can play these roles. So for the input process and for the output process, policy measures need to be explained, and even more so need to be actively communicated. We are always amazed how even the best announced measures in the newspaper, many people when they say, haven't you seen, haven't you heard? Oh. So there is a need to actively communicate. And how to do this on a European level, it's hard, but I'm sure there are structures who can do that and who should do that. And it's also not as expensive as people might think. Once you have a working infrastructure on the national level, in between that, again, appropriate communication and input and output processes. I think you need to think them both. So to inform policy making, but when policy making is done, to make sure that people actually know about sticks, carrots, and tambourines and skateboards.
Okay, I have Erwin who wants to jump in here as well, but after Erwin, I'm going to ask you to keep your answer as quick as possible, because I also want to ask Clemens how the input from the networks actually gets used for development of policy measures. I think that's an important point to get from Clemens as well. So Erwin, if I can leave it over to you quickly.
Sure, quickly indeed. Well, I would very much rely on local climate ambition. What I do see is that if a particular region or particular city really has a strong climate action, then they start thinking on how to implement that, how to achieve that, and then it starts engaging with all stakeholders, including the industry. That's a strong enabler. Thank you.
Very efficient, very effective. Thank you, Erwin. Clemens, I'll let you tell me how it works from the Energy Efficiency Network side.
Yeah, I mean, there are two different findings which are takeaways also for policymakers, and the one is that a broad variety of company can move forward if they want to and if they make the first step. So, and we have seen that networks with really thousands of companies in Germany that they can voluntarily, if they start moving, they find measures they can implement, and it does support their business model, and it doesn't increases their competitiveness, and not the other way around. So I want to really hook in on what Christiane said. It's about competitiveness of companies in the future, and this is something you can learn. Okay, these companies afterwards say very clearly, this helped us. That didn't break us, but that helped us what we did here, and we found other things. So the whole multiple benefits topic, I will not talk about that, but that's also linked to that. And on the other thing, operationally, something which was learned is the broad variety of measures which can be implemented. So really that overview, okay, it's all there. So there's a lot to do. There's not the single silver bullet in industry and we need the program for this or a program for that, but it's a systemic and structural thing companies have to implement. And if you take the network approach, you usually in a company, you go beyond the point where it's the one person in the company who's driving it, and you make it more part of the company's strategy. And this is important because then you are beyond the risk of the one person leaving the company and you're standing there alone and nothing's there. And if you have the energy manager, but you also have the link to the top management, then you make it a strategic topic for the company. And then you can add with sticks, carrots and all that stuff, but then the company is there and it's not the single person whose personal interest is energy efficiency. So those are some of the takeaways we took also then the further developments.
I unfortunately have to leave it there because we've reached our absolute deadline of 15:30, but many thanks to all of the panelists. Unfortunately, you're going to have to imagine the applause from the audience, but I want you to really, it's ringing out there. I think definitely a lot of appreciation. I found it very, very interesting what you had to say, and I think you have given a lot of ideas for tomorrow's panel 1 session, which will be, the first one is at 12 o'clock, taking the pulse of key industry program approaches, which builds on very much what we're talking about here in the last few minutes, especially from what Clemens is saying. And tomorrow afternoon, we have learning how to do it better through experience. Again, we're trying to really get the lessons learned from an industry perspective and from a programmatic perspective. So hopefully I will see, or at least get the questions from all of you again tomorrow. And many thanks again to the panelists, to the audience, and wishing you the best for the rest of your day. All the very, bye-bye.